Okay, let's move on. This is a really fascinating thing on the lines. There was a lot of discussion around Southwest Airlines, whether there was a sick out or not. There was contravening evidence kind of in both directions. But I do have to say, the fact that Southwest's new announcement does look like the sick out may have been part of some of the flight shortage and what we were seeing. Let's put this up there on the screen from CNBC. So Southwest has actually dropped its plan to put unvaccinated staff on unpaid leave starting in December. This was really tough for them, Krystal, because as we know, Southwest was a federal government contractor, and contractors were subject by the Biden administration's vaccine mandate in order to either get vaccinated or not. The airlines, the order that required them to get vaccinated or receive an exemption for medical or religious reasons. So they scrapped the plan there, but they have not yet received the religious or medical exemption as of the federal deadline in December. What it looks like is that there seems to be some sort of negotiation happening. They already have an incredibly high vaccination rate amongst their pilots. We don't know the exact Southwest one, but we do know, and I'm about to get to this with Delta Airlines. But it is interesting that Southwest and Delta have both taken away their kind of punitive measures, given that they have overwhelmingly high vaccination rates. We saw that with United Airlines staffers. I think it was like 98%. I mean, at the end of the day, the amount of people who were terminated for not being vaccinated was like 235, something. Yeah. Like, you know, a rounding error in terms of what the actual numbers of staffers were. But whenever it comes to pilots, it does look like I said, I mean, whether you believe Southwest or not, that it was weather or, you know, right wing would have you believe it's entirely a sick out. It does seem there was a big confluence of events, that there was enough of an organic pushback that two of the airlines are taking away the punitive measures for not getting the vaccine on, even though they do have 90+% vaccination rates amongst their pilots.
It's also worth noting here, there's a distinction. So federal government contractors are subject to a more stringent vaccine. It's an actual mandate.
Yeah, like an actual mandate.
Whereas, you know, what was announced for businesses with 100 people or more was vaccine or test.
Yeah.
For federal government contractors, which these large airlines qualify as federal government contractors, you either have to get vaccinated or you have to offer some kind of legitimate medical or religious excuse.
Right.
And so that's what Southwest is kind of leaning into. Like, all right, guys, if y'all don't want to get vaccinated, you better come up with something good for us here in the next couple of weeks. And it's fairly unclear, at least as I read it, what will happen if ultimately you do end up with a group of employees who don't get vaccinated and they're not able to come up with anything approaching a sort of legitimate excuse. They leave it unsaid what's going to ultimately happen, but they're effectively sort of taking the pressure off, giving people more time, encouraging them to get their exemptions in and move forward with that process. Because, you know, I mean, there's no doubt of whether the chaos was because of a sick out. There's no doubt that there have been protests. There's been a lawsuit filed by the pilots union. So there was certainly pushback within the organization.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's just something I haven't seen the media acknowledge that one, you know, despite all of the people putting up the Southwest Airlines CEO being like, it has nothing to do with it. I mean, I don't think that this announcement's going to follow that if it had nothing to do with it. We should also say, I saw that religious exemptions, whenever it came to the COVID vaccine, it's complicated. So like right now, the Supreme Court actually just rejected a challenge to the main COVID-19 vaccine mandate. And this was actually Justice Breyer who turned away a religious challenge to the requirement. Now, again, this isn't dealing away with religious exemptions,
right?
The religious challenge to the idea of the main mandate itself. But it is an indicator that these types of things would not necessarily be enough in order to come all the way to the Supreme Court and strike down the national policy.
There are no major religions that have said that the vaccine is against my religion.
Yeah, actually, if anything, frankly,
they've been encouraging. Yeah, exactly. So it makes it a little bit challenging to come up with a sincere religious objection when every major religion in the country is in support of getting people vaccinated.
Obviously, there's different views.
Sure.
Whatever.
Yeah. Look, I'm sure there's somebody out there, but yes.
And so you put this together with the Delta Airlines CEO. Let's put this one up there. The Delta Airlines CEO, Ed Bastian, this was from a couple of days ago, but interesting when you pair them together. He refuses to impose what he called the, quote, divisive vaccine mandate. But again, you know, it just strikes me, 90% of the staff, of the pilots, already have the vaccine. And because they, quote, work collaboratively with employers, they don't want them to threaten to be fired. And again, though, we really don't know yet how this is going to go ahead and be, we don't know how this is going to be interpreted, whether the exemptions are going to be able to go through. I was reading recently about religious exemptions and the COVID-19 vaccine. I mean, it's complicated because part of the problem is we saw an abuse of religious exemption whenever it came to the measles vaccine. And we saw these, I mean, this was a huge thing in New York State because, I mean, I'll just say it, there were a lot of Orthodox Jewish communities who didn't want to get vaccinated. And there was a massive fight in New York about
You're talking about recently.
Oh yeah, this was only a couple of years ago.
Okay.
This is, I think we covered it actually on Rising with whenever we interviewed the Surgeon General, I remember, around religious exemptions because of large measles outbreaks that were happening. Once you have a critical mass of the population who's unvaccinated, it actually leads to the outbreak amongst like children. It became a whole thing. And then New York State wanted to remove the religious exemption completely. It gets very, very, very dicey whenever it comes to religious freedom and all of that. We see the same thing in Minnesota, I think with the Somali American population, obviously in California
Colorado
as well.
actually randomly has, and with them, it's more like the hippies.
That's like a crunchy granola
Yeah,
situation.
this is it's a horseshoe there.
Well, it's just fascinating, right? Because this will set up for possible challenges in court. We've seen the religious exemption challenge to the idea of a mandate itself has not yet gone through to the Supreme Court. And from the people I spoke to, they don't expect it to be there, especially given that amongst private employers that they have the testing requirement. It seems to be that it's not going to be an all-out mandate or not. The problem is actually amongst these federal government contractors, but Southwest and Delta now giving their pilots some time in order to try and get their affairs, not actually up or out, fire them, I think like United had. And that ultimately could result in a better equilibrium situation. I mean, look, they're 90-something% vaccinated. You look at that. You also see that, if they get their exemptions in, that would be roughly in line with the general population. But I do think it is interesting, and I don't think there was enough media coverage of the fact that, look, it was clear that the Southwest Airlines cancellations and more had not all to do, but somewhat. And again, the degree was to how much to do with the sick out or not. But the fact that they're going to come out and reverse their policy tells us that it was a contributing factor to that. And the fact that Delta also jumped in there, one of the big three, showed that there was at least some organic pushback. But to be clear, it's like 10%. It's not, thousands and thousands of people.
In a sense, what they're doing here too is kind of kicking the can down the road, giving people more time to figure out their excuses, their exemptions, so that they can, if they're really adamantly opposed, can try to figure that out. And so the question is, what comes next? And the other question is how heavy-handed in enforcement is the federal government?
What's the government
really going to do?
Are they really going to fine you or whatever?
If it really comes down to it, and there's this kind of stalemate where the airlines are saying, hey, we got this unvaccinated population without an adequate exemption, but we're not going to fire them. I mean, is the federal government going to just look the other way? How does that all ultimately shake out? Hard to say.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that one.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.